Thank you so much for coming on the show, Zach. Good to see you. Good to meet you. I guess this is how we meet nowadays, right? Through through Zoom. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your organization and what you're passionate about?
Absolutely. Thank you, Chris. My name's Zach Tussing. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer for a company called Thinglink. And Thinglinks have been around for about 10 years. We focused initially on creating image augmentation and interactivity to images. And since that time, we've really expanded quite significantly to really annotate anything that's in the digital world. So video, 360, 3D objects. And what our focus has become more and more, especially with the pandemic and as we meet today remotely, how do you make virtual experiences more engaging and interactive? And that's where the work that we've done, particularly around scenario builder and branch-based scenario-based learning, has developed to really focus on utilizing digital and physical objects and creating more engaging learning experiences with those. And so what am I passionate about? I mean, I really do love working with customers that understand, or we can help understand what their future may look like with technology, and how do you create kind of a better future together. So that's what I really love doing in my day-to-day job.
So you're not using the term metaverse. Please tell me you're not using the term metaverse.
Well, our CEO is. I think it's hard to avoid, but with Facebook taking such a big ownership stake in that term, I think we're going to have to find another term.
Oh, like it's like, it reminds me of the term hoverboard, right? Those things are not hoverboards. Okay.
There's nothing hovering about them.
And the metaverse is not actually the metaverse. The metaverse is a universe above our meta. Anyway, you get the picture. So how are these instantiated? I was looking at your website and I was trying to figure this out. I mean, when you talk about augmentation you were started with augmenting images, and then you're augmenting other media types. How does that augmentation actually instantiate itself?
Yeah, so I mean, the key thing for us has really been around the editor experience of allowing an end user, such as yourself, to take any of those baseline media, and they could be digital assets that are created in Unity or created in Adobe or other places, and allows you to take those assets and annotate them by incorporating hotspots. And these interactive hotspots, you can also incorporate text and audio and video and other resources that make that more of a complete experience. And what we see is that it's no longer just an image. It's an image, and then someone wants to provide a video of what goes on, or they want to create a 360 video of what's going on in an actual environment, or they want to have a 3D model to further explore. And so the ability to annotate and provide additional information and create transitions between those or questions about those is that kind of that middle ground of creating a virtual environment that's not a Unity oriented, and back to the metaverse conversation, a completely computer generated environment, but one that you with an iPhone could create. You could take a 360 video or image around your office, and then upload that, annotate that with other context, and really within 15 minutes create a lightweight version of a virtual environment that you could provide great context and learning with.
I can see how you can use this for training, but how would you use it for communication? I mean, is there a communication methodology behind it as well?
Yeah, so originally speaking, the majority of our clients were all doing it for corporate communication. So the death by PowerPoint world and the Zoom fatigue. Well, the reason that there is that is that you require somebody else to provide that pathway through an experience. It's, hey, click to the next slide. Maybe there's animation. Maybe a speaker's talking about something else, but how do you discover that kind of content on your own? And video that everybody has to read. Well, maybe 90% of the content, and there's some pieces of that content that are really specific to you. Well, you can develop, pieces of content that only a user can actually access, or a group of users can access, that is going to be more aligned specifically to what their needs are. So it does help in allowing users to have their own generated, self-generated path through communication, through learning. And it's not just rote, hey, we're going to go through this point, then this point, then this point. You can hop around quite easily based off a base image or resource, and then go, what inspires you and what's important to you.
So if you were to do that, you'd have to sort of pre-build the entire environment, just like you were building a deck, but you would allow people to jump around within it at whatever point they'd like to be, and everybody can have their individualized experience of what you're presenting.
Yeah, and that's really kind of the focus of what we did with the scenario builder functionality that we added to Thinglink. Before, what we had were these transitions called transition tags, where you could click from one place and go to another image, you go to another resource, not just resources that expose themselves on top of an image, but resources that you'd go to another experience. So you could go from an image to a video to a 3D object. And what we've done with Scenario Builder is, you and I are of an age that we remember our Choose Your Own Adventure books that my kids didn't have.
I love those books.
Yeah, exactly. But that's the kind of idea, is that, you can pose a set of questions or a set of experiences that, can bifurcate or separate multiple different pathways. And we have a university right now that it's doing, biological outcomes of 2 different parents and what those impacts might have on their children through our scenario builder functionality. So there's, literally thousands of different combinational gene traits that could show up and express themselves in a child. And by making different selections and making different choices along that path, you can have a very, individualized learning path based on those selections that you make. And we've focused on the usability of this. So, as you can imagine, you think about it, well, that sounds difficult. Well, what we've done is really focused on the user experience. And, we say, if you can create a PowerPoint, you can create a Thinglink, you can create a scenario that allows you to add these branching points, these assessments, these questions, these jump to points that create a much more complete learning experience.
So can you use the tool by itself to actually build that individualized training experience?
Yeah, you can use. The thing that we suggest is that you have some existing assets that you want to incorporate to make it, and those existing assets, it could be a a PowerPoint deck, could be an image, could be any of those types of resources. And then we do suggest, from a learning design perspective, that you spend a little bit of time and think about what the learning outcome should be and what you're trying to drive, instead of playing with a tool and creating a map of the unknowable.
Yeah, it's fun to play with, but you really need a goal, right?
Exactly. And so, I mean, most of our users jump in with just trying to play around, but from there, it's really, okay, if I'm going to create a complete learning experience, what am I trying to drive from a learning outcome perspective? And what are the steps along that path that reinforce that learning? And what do I have to make sure that my learners know? And doing that really allows you to kind of create a much more compelling and accurate learning solution.
Very cool. So did you say you've been around for about 10 years or so? Have you been with the company that long?
I have, and I've only been with the company for about 1.5 years now. I started my career in just straight software development technology. We were doing outsourced product development for a bunch of different companies. In about 2015, I really started working heavily in education, and over that time, I got to know a lot of different companies in the education space. And when I met with Thinglink about 1.5 years ago, I said, well, I'd love the opportunity to work with you guys. And started consulting with them, and then, joined them full time, because I do think it's a very interesting and compelling, outside of the conversations of the metaverse, it's a very compelling conversation.
Nothing wrong with the metaverse if it sells product. it's kind of like the word podcast, right? I mean, I remember when podcasting first came out in 2005. I'm like, okay, there's no magic here, but for some reason, you create these new terms, and everybody wants to just jump on board, and VCs are going mental, going, oh, we want to fund podcasting because it's a cool new thing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's the metaverse is really interesting because the conversation around it, and I have a 13-year-old and a 10-year-old, so they're very immersed in video games, and the experiences that they hold up are often entertainment oriented as it relates to what the metaverse is, not necessarily business related. And I see the potential value in there, but I do think it's quite far away outside of the entertainment purposes of a game like Fortnite that has virtual concerts in it, and my kid, which is great. But for you and I, creating those truly metaverse-like experiences, that's a lot of development hours. And so it's a question of, do you develop something that takes 6 months to develop, and then it's obsolete in another 2 months, and you've gotten 2 months of use out of an 8-month project, or do you try to look at things and go, what are the incremental steps that we can take along the way to combine resources that we already have, the CAD CAM drawings on equipment that you might have, a 360 video, an onboarding video, and create those more as metaverse light experiences where you're getting a lot of the interactivity, the focus around immersive environments and spaces, but you don't have to spend 6 months and hundreds of thousands of dollars on developers creating those experiences that, as I say, might not have a shelf life of much more than a year.
Well, it kind of reminds me of all these choose your own adventures, because I'm also a writer, and I'm thinking, if you've got to sort of map out every possible permutation, it kind of reminded me of the Netflix Bandersnatch. You remember that? That it was like an interactive, I don't know, streaming show, and you had at different points during the show, you could actually go down this path or this path or this path. And I thought, well, you have to map all those paths out. You have to film out all those paths. So that just seems like a ton of work to be able to do that. So you're saying that you've figured out ways of making it less work?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, an example that we work with is a company that does training videos for aerospace, and particularly they have, whenever they launch a new airplane, or whatever, they launch a new training module for a new airplane, how do they get pilots to be familiar with the dash alignment, the pre-flight checklist, a lot of other components? Well, they have somebody that's on site when that plane's delivered, and they walk the staff through what they have to do and what they have to walk through there. Well, how do they train those people? Do they fly them into every time for a new plane? That's the typical option. But what they've done now is that they go in when to the manufacturer's facility, when they've released a new airplane or new piece of equipment. They do a 360 walkthrough with 360 video and 360 images, and they do a walkthrough of the entire plane that way. And then they take the CAD CAM drawings, which is another 3D object, and go in with a 360 camera and collect footage underneath the plane, under each wing, in the cockpit, within a matter of under a day. And now they've got a dozen or so assets that they can annotate. They can host in their LMS, or they can host them on their webpage, however they want to do it. And now they've got access to this virtual airplane that they can train their employees on. They can walk through. Employees can ask questions about, what about this, what about that. And now they don't have to fly these people in every month to check out the new plane or the new equipment update that they've done, so that they can train other people. And then those assets can also live within their, their participants. So you get somebody who came into a training not in their best day. They only captured about 30% of the training. And now where do they go? They can't call the guy to, hey, walk me through this part of the plan again. Which part now? So it allows them to have that kind of persistent asset that also allows and supports that training long term.
So are there ways to I mean, I was looking at some of these options you have where you do museums and you do training and stuff like that. I'm assuming there's ways of crowd setting it up. So like if I wanted to add a new data point, like if I had a new insight for a particular point in this thing, that I'd be able to do that if I have the ability to. Is that right?
Yeah, there's two things that you can do. One is that when you create an asset, you can have that as part of anybody in the organization could create additional, they could edit that asset and add additional, notes or features to it. The other, which we find really kind of critical, is the ability to solicit feedback during that learning experience. So the ability for an end user to consume, to ask questions within that. So providing feedback. So you can have check-ins and checkpoints along the thing, the journey, the learning journey, and say, hey, do you have any questions about this? In which they can submit responses particular to a particular component of that that learning experience. And not to harp on the metaverse, the other piece of this that's important is that these assets live, they work on your phone, they work on a desktop, they work on a tablet, but they also work in VR headsets. So anything that's a 3D object or a 360 work in VR headsets as well, which we are increasingly seeing kind of an application of these VR use cases in retail and construction and manufacturing, where the persistence of that asset living in multiple modalities is also kind of critical.
I mean, it kind of reminds me that there's friends of mine here who run museums, and
Yep.
they're having so many issues through COVID. It's like, what are they going to do? Because I mean, the whole point of a museum is a in-person experience. So if the entire thing was digitized, then you'd be able to sort of communicate to each other through this experience. I mean, is that part of what it can do as well?
Not quite asynchronous or not quite synchronous communication. It's asynchronous communication now. So we don't have the ability to collaborate and communicate with other users of the experience at the same time. Other creators, yes. Other users, not necessarily yet. It is part of our roadmap and what we are working on currently. But the driver really is that, how do you get people from museums in particular, how do you get people to understand all the amazing assets? And all of us have seen pictures of the Mona Lisa or various other works of art. Personally, I'd rather go visit the pyramids in Egypt than see them online, regardless of 360 or 3D object orientation.
Exactly.
So getting people to see the assets that you do have and experience those assets, even in a lighter form, is a chance for excitement and a chance for engagement of that audience that might just be disconnected right now. I think I've only been to 2 museums since the pandemic began, and they're definitely struggling with how to make people know what they have and all the great work that they continue to do.
Exactly. Absolutely. So did you say that you worked with larger companies before you came? I mean, Thinglink is kind of a startup, right? It's only been around for 10 years. How many employees do you have?
So we have about 35 employees currently. And then we have consultants that work with us as well. Most of those employees are engineers. So most of the time we spend, we're just kind of building out the sales and go-to-market teams. But we're really focused, heavily on the product engineering currently.
I'd love to talk a little bit about the history of the startup. Are you familiar with Thinglink and its history, or?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay,
So,
maybe you could tell me a little bit about like how it started, like who founded it, and like where did the idea come from? Because I love the concept.
Yeah. So our CEO and founder Ula started the work with Thinglink as her PhD program, at the university. So her initial thought and plan was that, that the future of media is interactivity, right? So if it's baseline images, an image is worth 1,000 words. Well, how do you make it worth 10 rich experience than just images? And that, rapidly translated to, okay, we're going to create an annotation layer on top of the internet, and we're going to allow for people to annotate anything that's out there on the internet. And we had a couple patents associated with it in the initial approach. It's founded in 2011, and in 2012 we started bringing on our first clients. And they were really just, around, okay, here's interactivity that we can apply to images to create more context and more, more insights into what that core image is. And from that point, it was, okay, are we a marketing company? Are we a communications company? Kind of dabbled in between. But
can I ask you what your first customers were, what space they were in, and how you got them?
Yeah, it was all through kind of self-service business. You build it and they will come model. So, the first customers, we had some that were in real estate, we had some that were in retail, we had some that were in education. And
so it was all over the map. You didn't actually, did you focus on a specific area, or were you just like whatever came in?
It was a complete build it, they will come. We received funding early along that journey, and we kind of really focused on the development of the tool and the product. Launched the web properties, brought people in, focused on the user experience of the application and the onboarding process. And as a typical software as a service company, there's a free trial, so anyone could really access it. And then if they saw significant value, they would upgrade to accounts. But there was, initially really communications and marketing was that first kind of, easiest path to go to. And we, from a content marketing perspective, outlining use cases, outlining how people would do stuff was really our driver, but it wasn't any outbound marketing efforts to bring those users in. And, the transition came both from what we added with the technology and the interactivity components of the different types of media, but also what we've seen from the actual education community itself, and that being higher ed and K-12, where there was just a lot of teachers and professors and education course designers are saying, oh, this is great. This kind of meets a need for the way that we develop content, because I can take an image of the water cycle or of the human body and provide a lot more context on it than I would typically, or I'd have to. So it allowed me to get a little deeper with the content that I currently have. And so that work with universities and K-12 school districts, and then really in the corporate e-learning space, started to shape the direction of our business, where we started doing more and more in education and really focusing on how do we support these users in a more complete way.
So then you pivoted to be more higher education, or did you create another product line for that? Or
so it's all one product line still. And so we still have, a lot of our businesses utilizing for marketing and communication use cases. But what we've done just now with what I mentioned earlier, the scenario builder tool, was really focused specifically on the K-12 higher ed and corporate e-learning markets, and providing them a tool that would allow them to develop course material and product walkthroughs in a more complete way than before. So instead of having a tool that was really just focused on interactivity, this is the focus of creating, branched learning scenarios. And those branched learning scenarios are, very applicable specifically to the e-learning environment. Although we have some marketers that are playing with it as well, as is per normal.
So if I wanted to see a demo of how this operates, would I just go to your site, or are there other places that are more effective? Like, is there like an amazing demo we can look at somewhere?
Yeah, there's demos. We have a lot of the core use cases available on our website, thinglink.com. That has a lot of information about clients and use cases and examples of Thinglinks that are in the wild. There also, we have tons of onboarding videos and other resources that are available. The and you know and then there's the Thinglink in the wild of pharmaceutical companies and healthcare companies and museums and universities that have Thinglink examples all over the place that we can point links to, and we have blog posts too that outline those. But as a user who's new to Thinglink, you can just go to Thinglink and say start now. Click the top button, and you can get it set up with an account and start playing around with it. There are some some small limitations of what you can do, but you can get a really good feel of what you can do almost instantly. And back to the user design, the focus being on that, we don't really think you need much training to get up and running. To make it amazing, you might need a little bit of time, but to get up and running, it doesn't.
Amazing always takes longer, right?
Exactly.
So I wanted to ask a little bit about, I mean, when you in your sort of product journey of building this thing and getting it out, have there been any sort of wrong turns and failures, and how you've been able to get over them?
Yeah, I think that there always are with any startup, any company that's trying to figure out the market and the product market fit. I think that some of the key challenges that we had is that initially we focused on trying to be everything to everybody, and when you have everyone as your potential client, the use cases and the requests that come in can be quite extensive, and prioritizing the things that are going to be more effective along that journey, instead of, hey, this might provide us revenue because ABC Corporation wants to do this and we'll be able to get there for them. So once we stopped being reactionary to the market and really focused on what are the core things that we want the company to become, and what are the core things that are kind of fundamental to the experience of our users, I think that was really kind of a turning point for the company. And that really went when we focused mostly on the editorial experience, the ease of creation, what that onboarding process looks like for a new creator, and how easily they can go from having nothing to having something they can share with other people. Really kind of changed the success factors for us, because it's like any tool. If it's not easy and it's not intuitive, and it doesn't meet that core case of, hey, I want to create something I can share, there's you kind of get a lot of people that aren't 100% satisfied.
Well, it's amazing how there's basically no loyalty left, right? If something's slightly easier, I'm just going to go try some. I'm just going to go do that instead, right? It's like just hop from one thing to another. And I mean, I'm assuming you've got competitors in your space. I mean, how closely do you watch what they do? I mean, are you are you the leader in your space? Are you second? Where are you in your space?
So we're the originator in the space, and there are a bunch of different players. And I think that what we see is that from what we do fundamentally, there isn't a truly analogous play that is a direct competitor to us. So there's organizations out there that are focused on the virtual tour or the real estate tour world, because there's a big market for that, and because they're very specific around, hey, I'm going to create a real estate tour, and I want to have call to action so you can contact the realtor now. That's a little bit different than us. There's companies that have focused on content interoperability or interactivity. It's really just on images, so it's more of the you know, the kind of the Prezi world of creating interactive presentations, which, you know, we see that as something that we can do, but it's not really what we're focused on. What we're focused on is that kind of intersection of all those different media types. And, you know, most of those players don't support, you know, 3D objects or 360 imagery, or, you
Right.
know, not include video. So it's, you know, we're combining all those different experiences. So the things that they might do specifically well for a particular industry, we do well across the board. And they might have some more depth around areas, but we have more depth across the product. But, you know, if there weren't competitors, we probably either we'd be in a different place or we wouldn't be here at all.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, you know, it's a space that's got some value to it. And do you think that, I'm assuming that the pandemic probably upped your game, right? I mean, you had a lot more companies coming to you going, we need this now because we can't do things in person any longer.
Yeah, it was kind of amazing when the pandemic, you know, started to really, when people knew it was not business as usual, and it's not going to be just a couple of weeks here, you know, we're going to shut down for 2 weeks and it's all going to be back to normal. The companies that came out of the woodwork were really, you know, surprising. Like, you know, Fortune 50 companies like, hey, we are sick and tired of video conferencing. Can you give us another solution to be able to support the way we communicate with our users? Or, you know, or retail companies, you know, we need to train people, but we're not flying trainers out to locations anymore. How are you going to be able to support that? And that was really quite a, you know, an interesting time, because it made us rethink the product, because now it was, we always felt that this was coming, but it accelerated everything, and accelerated how we had to support our clients and how we had to work with our clients. And I'm super proud of our development team and the number of releases and the number of updates they've done over the last 18 months, because it's in the light of everything that's going on, they've really evolved the product quite significantly.
Yeah, that's the thing about crises. They tend to push innovation for some reason. You know, it's like it's almost like you need that, because if you think about telecommuting, we've had telecommuting since 1982, but there's still companies that say, you know, you got to come into the office. But
yeah, and it's wild, because I mean, I think that, you know, I started, like, I had my first client in education in 2001. And at the time, it was with the State Department of Education. We were doing some portal work with them. And at that time, they were really focused, hey, we want to have learning anywhere. We want to have people access to resources anywhere. And we want to create these, you know, virtual experiences that are the same as in classroom experiences. And that was, you know, 20 years ago. And, you know, now people are saying, oh, we actually have to do that now. And it's, you know, the companies like, you know, Coursera and edX and 2U that are really, hey, you know, if we're going to do online education, we've got to do it different. We can't just capture a lecture video and have you know, a professor speak for 50 minutes in lecture and have some notes on the side and expect that experience to work. Because I think that they've seen that, you know, the course completion rates aren't so great when you have to watch, you know, the 60 hours of lecture time with no interactivity of your fellow students or note sharing. So.
Exactly. Although if you think about it, there's way more interactivity in what you're doing than in a typical in-person lecture, right? Because you're just sitting back listening to the professor.
Yeah, exactly.
And you're like passing out, or, you know. How boring is this guy?
My first few years of college, I was able to figure it out after that, but yeah.
Exactly. All right. So now it's time to think like a futurist. It's 10 years out. It's the year 2031. Where do you think you'll be? Are you going to be like fully immersed in the metaverse, and that's all we're going to be doing?
Well, I hope not. I do enjoy being outside nature, but I think that there is going to be a significant, you know, a switch to the experiences that we have, right? We've got this two-dimensional interactivity that we have between each other now. You know, yes, we have voice and we can add prompts and some other things, but what are you looking at right now? What am I looking at? What is my colleague to the right or the left, or my virtual right or the left? How are we interacting with them? So I do think that there's going to be some changes, and I think that where we see the kind of the future of learning is that on demand, anytime access to resources. And to your point earlier on podcasts, the types of information and the types of learning that are available, and as you can make those things richer and more engaging and more interactive, I think that they're going to become more accessible, and you go from that, that baseline rote learning to much more experiential learning, where you force a learner to engage in different ways, solve problems in context of that experience, that does statistically and research oriented prove better learning outcomes. I do think that that's probably where we're going to get to a lot closer, where it's not just a stand and deliver model, but you've got to seek out that knowledge. You have to interact with that to get kind of the content, instead of flipping on a video in the background and letting it play while you surf Instagram on your phone.
Yeah, typical actual college students. But I mean, it's interesting you say that, because it's almost making me think that there's going to be some kind of convergence of gaming and education, because you've got to be able to add some elements to the education to make it more interactive and engaging, because a lot of education is really pretty dry, right? And you got to make it more engaging. So if you bring in more gaming elements, if these combine together, then you'd be able to make it as sticky as gaming and as powerful as education. So do you see that happening? Some kind of cross section going on there?
I mean, the gamification of education has been going on for quite a long time, and you take a company like Duolingo and what they've done with the contests and the daily goals and the objectives associated with learning a language, and obviously there's Babbel and others that do similar things, that they've a lot of companies have already figured that out. But I do think that creating these experiences that you're getting credit for the journey, not just the end outcome, is important, because not everybody learns in the same linear focus, and they might master a component that others won't. And so being able to have those checkpoints and utilize the data associated with it to understand what how a learner learns, what they're experiencing, why they're experiencing it, and really giving credit for the entirety of their experience, not just the results associated with a formative assessment, is kind of critical.
It's interesting you should mention that, because I'm always under the impression that anything that's too gamified, like Duolingo, is not like a serious teaching tool. It's almost like an armchair teaching tool. Oh, I really want to learn Japanese, so I'll use Duolingo. My son is trying to learn German through Duolingo, and he's been doing it. He's done thousands of exercises, and he still doesn't feel like he's any closer to learning German.
Well,
so I almost feel like
there's a limit.
there's like this is almost like play learning as opposed to like real learning. And that's what I'm saying, is that maybe there's this juxtaposition where you can take real learning, the serious intense stuff that's really trying to teach you something, and not gamify it in a light way, but gamify it in that you fill in the entire. It's kind of like we were talking about with this airplane simulator, right? An airplane simulator can be a gaming environment, but can also be incredibly educational.
Yeah, and I think that the Duolingo is designed to be a lightweight learning experience that you do in 5 or 10 minutes a day, and it's something to an enrichment activity, as opposed to I'm going to pass you the nuclear codes based on your knowledge. So I think that the rigor and the structure and the material of it, there's ways to gamify just about anything. And there's some companies out there that are doing really great gamification, but it's not an easy topic. It's not something you can just say, hey, we're going to gamify, molecular biology by doing A, B, C, and D. You can add gamified components. You can add, the checkpoints, the list, the competitive scenarios, the escape room type, games into it. But it still comes down to fundamental learning design and creating an experience that incorporates the best of both worlds, and not just gamify a learning experience.
So do you see, I mean, I'm thinking now that you're saying that is like in 10 years, well, I mean, right now, the metaverse, let's call it that, is pretty light. I mean, there's not that many. I mean, you can go to Costco and buy an Oculus for $3.99,
Yeah.
and there's still not that many people who actually use VR, AR, or metaverse tools. I mean,
Yeah.
do you think in 10 years it's going to be way more prevalent? That'll be like the number one thing that we use. I'm just waiting for the Apple goggles. I think once the Apple goggles are here, that's probably when it's going to really start taking off.
Well, I think that it's still going to take some time. So is 10 years the point where, virtual reality headsets come into their own outside of entertainment purposes, right? So I have an Oculus for my kids downstairs. They played 2 or 3 games on it quite a bit when we got it to them for their birthday over the summer. I don't think they've had it on since.
Really
So,
interesting.
so even that experience, I think that there's use cases for that type of technology that we're going to see, increase significantly. But there's 2 major challenges with it. One is the content creation process, right? So it takes time and it takes effort to develop these truly virtual environments, where I do think that, Thinglink plays a really critical role of creating content that is not, an alien coming down from space and you shooting it out of the sky, but you can utilize it to show your new facility across the world to your users. And there's the kind of the application of effective learning design within the virtual environment. So, what does a true immersive learning simulation look like? And I think there's a lot of people that are creating that, but it's a kind of a time and a bandwidth perspective. How many people have the ability to create those amazing learning scenarios for, and back to your choose your own adventures that have the almost unlimited variation to them to actually create a really immersive, personalized learning path within a virtual environment. And maybe the gaming companies switch to education companies along the way. I don't know. I know that Unity and Epic Games are both gaming companies, and
Oh yeah, exactly.
and they're not only in gaming anymore. So
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And I'm thinking that it's like, can we actually spend most of our time in some kind of metaverse, or will we still be sitting behind screens like we are now?
I think we're going to be still sitting behind screens, but I think that the metaverse is going to start to, capture a bigger part of our day. And if the percentage of my time in VR environments 0 now, maybe it's only going to be 2 to 5%, but that is a huge jump for the majority of the population.
That's true. But as I said, the Apple goggles. Once the Apple goggles are here, if they can turn this thing into a consumer product that's widespread, I think that's when we'll pick it up. I foresee the Ready Player One world where everyone's wearing those augmented reality goggles.
That might be a while.
Yeah, it might be a while before we get there. Well, it's very cool. Well, thank you so much. This has been fantastic. So if somebody wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way? Just go to thinglink.com or
Thinglink.com or Zach@thinglink.com. That's the easiest way to get me. And I really appreciate it, Chris. It was a great conversation.
Thank you so much. This has been great.
All
Talk
right.
to you soon.
Thank you.
Have a good one. Bye-bye.